Before last Friday's Supreme Court ruling, many of us argued that same-sex marriage could or would lead to polygamy. Gay marriage proponents were quick to dismiss our warning, but consider Chief Justice Roberts' dissent to the court's decision. I'll come back to that in a little bit. This is from somebody by the name of Dr. Jim Dennison. It was sent to me, and I've just now got a hold of it. Well, you do know that last Friday?
It was Friday, yes,
Friday,
the 26th.
The day after the Affordable Care Act decision, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that essentially gay people have a right to get married, constitutional right to get married. And this was something that had been worked for forever and ever and ever, and there we have it. We thought it would be appropriate to get the opinion, because he gave a pretty interesting interview to the local newspapers of the Bishop of Catholic Bishop of Brownsville, Bishop Flores. Thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's good to be here.
Did you expect them to rule as they ruled?
I wasn't particularly surprised. I kind of had a sense that that's the way the courts were leaning. I was a bit surprised by the sweeping nature of it, but because it was basically an affirmative to both questions before the court as to whether a state had to recognize a same-sex union as marriage, and whether the state was required to provide a license, and they answered affirmative to both.
I am assuming that you don't think this is a good idea, this gay marriage thing.
Well, precisely because of it ultimately constitutes a redefinition, basically by fiat, as to what constitutes marriage, which is an institution that kind of predates governments and also predates any particular religion. It's a basic human institution, and that the court would think itself not only capable but also having the authority to kind of redefine something that is prior to a governmental entity is quite astounding when you look at it kind of in a broad sweep of history. And yes, it does secondarily, of course, have sweeping legal ramifications, which we're going to have to plow through over the next, I'm sure, several years.
Yeah. The ramifications. Do you feel like I do, Bishop, that the ramifications for a lot of people who are for gay marriage, the ramifications of something never occurred to them, and when they find out what some of them may be, they're going to go, "Well, I didn't intend that."
Yeah, that may very well be the case, because the ramifications will work themselves out in law. Because what happens is that once marriage is redefined a certain way, just as I said, by judicial fiat, then it becomes deeply embedded in the whole legal system, which affects the whole way we operate basically as a society. So specifically, I think it's a concern to the church, not only the Catholic Church but religious entities in general, who will then have to basically wonder and be aware of the ramifications when we just basically exercise our basic religious entities, our institutions, our schools, our hospitals, our universities.
Well, do you believe that, let's think how this might work out, that people would come, I don't know if Catholics have adoption programs or orphanages where they adopt children out, but will a same-sex couple come to you, or perhaps a single gay person saying, we want to adopt a child, and you can't not give it to us because we're gay? You think that's going to happen?
I think that's not out of the question, with regard to whether the government will compel a religious institution to adjust its adoption policies to adapt to the new definition, and that will certainly present a problem for the Catholic Church in any case. But you could also see there's possible ramifications in terms of just how we would run our institutions, in terms of some of our universities have dormitories for the married and so forth. So it's quite possible that the next basic series of contentious issues in court will be whether where does the Constitution guarantee the free exercise of religion? Yeah. Where do the two sort of meet, and where is kind of a modus vivendi arrived at? Whereas a religious institution can operate according to its belief and to its practice, and then the government's interest in compelling it to do otherwise. That's going to be a very serious problem in the future. We're
talking with the Bishop of Brownsville, Daniel Flores.
Bishop Flores, Roxanne Garcia, kind of going based off of what Davis asked about adoption. I mean, what's to say, or what would happen, do you think, if a couple walks up to you or your church or a church in the valley or wherever and just asks, "Hey, we want to get married at this church," and someone says no?
They want to get married in the church. Is that what you
Yes,
said?
at a Catholic church. Or
Well,
if a priest.
well, from a priest, the response would be a gentle response. That currently in law there are many ways you could get married, but one of them is not inside the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church has its own norms for preparing people for marriage and for what we understand marriage to be. And that's true not just in questions of same-sex unions. I mean, there's a whole series of things that are required to get married to receive the sacrament, because in the Catholic Church is a sacrament. And so that would be something that we would now, as I understand it, currently the government would not compel the church to perform a same-sex wedding. That would be in our view, a serious, an egregious violation of the separation of church and state. But I can see how someone might think that we would be required to, but that's certainly not the case.
Bishop, another question. I had recently spoke to a pastor in San Antonio. Has like a 4,000 member church, and I got the chance to meet him, and he told me that about 8 years ago, they added something to their doctrine saying that they do not support the gay marriage or homosexuality, transgender, anything like that. And I think because it's legally or it's written down, nothing can really happen to them when it comes to them being sued. Does a Catholic church have something like that as well?
Well, I don't know that we have anything like that specifically written down for a congregation. I mean, the teaching of the Catholic Church is pretty well known with regard to what constitutes marriage, and I think it would, it's a matter of doctrine in terms of just going back to the New Testament. So, in our issue, I need to emphasize this: our issue is what constitutes marriage, because the definition of marriage is a stable union between a man and a woman, which has an openness to life, and which basically provides the solid framework for the ordering of society and the raising of children. That's what our issue is. That's what we want to kind of continue to not only talk about and defend and teach, but also to kind of put into practice in our institutions. Our institutions, of course, don't serve just Catholics. They serve anybody who's interested in attending or in participating in them. And we would insist on the free exercise to do that. And that's kind of the issue.
What do you think about this idea that polygamy is next? And I don't see why it's forbidden now, but I don't see why it could legally be forbidden.
Well, I can see that. I can see the point you're raising. It'll be interesting to see how the courts. I mean, the courts apparently are quite capable of any number of gymnastic moves to accommodate what they seem to think is the popular view at the time. So it would be interesting to see how the courts would justify not permitting polygamy but I think that at that point that becomes kind of a legal fiat issue. And I don't know how that would turn out.
If the argument is we should, God commands us to love, God is love. Who are you to tell me who I cannot love? Who are you to tell me how many I can love?
Well, that would be the argument that would be placed before the court. Now, courts really, are in a difficult position to kind of just determine, where the lines are there. And I would think there's a whole series of legal and traditional and just kind of precedent-setting things they would have to look at there. I really, to be honest, I don't know how the courts would deal with something like that. And it is a concern, at least in principle, that once the court considers it has the right to redefine marriage in one way, on what grounds will it prevent it from doing so in another? I do think that becomes an issue for the court. The fact is, the court is being very, very sort of culture directive right now. I mean, that's just how we would call it. I think it's kind of directing where it thinks the culture ought to go. That's a slippery business, because cultures, shift and turn according to whatever happens to be at that time the most prevalent view. The church, we've been around for a long time. 2,000 years is a long time, and we kind of steady she goes. And we teach. People are free to join the church. People are free to dissent from what the church teaches, but the church is what she is, and she will continue to do that.
Amen.
What about the following idea, which was raised in the arguments before the Supreme Court about gay marriage? One of the justices asked the Solicitor General, "What about getting at church?" He didn't phrase it this way. What about using tax exempt status? Because remember, Bob Jones University had its tax exempt status taken away because it for bad relationship between
Interracial couples.
Interracial couples. And so they took away their tax exempt status. Why couldn't they do that to Presbyterians or Catholics?
Yeah, and the Solicitor General, as I recall, was not real definitive in the way he answered that, simply saying that that would become an issue.
Oh yeah.
To some extent, the way the Justice Kennedy wrote the majority opinion, the 5-4 opinion, he kind of at least left one paragraph in the whole decision open to the whole issue of that he recognized that there were institutions and people who did not agree with this particular definition, and he said that they would be able to continue to teach that. What concerns me there is that he specifically mentioned that that those who dissent, or institutions or churches that dissent, could teach that. He didn't use the word exercise, which is the constitutional word. I mean, I think, and that's where I think we have to look at those kinds of eventualities. It's not unheard. It's not unthinkable that somebody would challenge the church's tax exempt status. I mean, people can challenge that in court, and then we would have to defend it. And the church will. I mean, we will defend that. But we do think it's important to work in society and to make our case before the courts and so on and so forth. But in the end, the church has to be willing to basically accept the consequences of the fact that the world will not always think of the way the church does, and that means we may have to lose something. But if it's a choice between losing our ability to be faithful to what we believe according to the scriptures and losing tax exempt status, we will be faithful to what we teach. And I've been thinking, we have to recognize the church may have to make some sacrifices to maintain our teaching in this current climate. But there are Christians dying in other parts of the world for just simply being Christian, and I think we have to be prepared to give a witness. And ours, I don't think, will be as drastic as they're suffering in certain parts of the world right now.
That's a great response, Bishop.
On that note, Bishop, we will thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it, and perhaps on other topics that would be appropriate, we'll have you on again.
Good, that'd be great. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir. Daniel Flores is the Bishop of Brownsville. He's your bishop.